Welcome back to the Bit by Bit podcast. Thanks for joining us for part 2 of my discussion with Christian Moss. For anyone who's joining us now and hasn't listened to part 1, I suggest you go back, and for everyone else, I hope you enjoy.
I sort of one of these people who's done a bit of everything.
I've done all sorts. I was in the motor trade for a while.
How old are you?
30.
Oh, pretty
30.
young to have done like so many different things.
Yeah, I'm a bit like that. So I started working and businesses from like young.
Okay.
Very, very young. I've always just enjoyed doing that kind of stuff. And then I went into the motor trade and started just buying and selling cars by myself after that for a while, off the drive and...
Entrepreneur.
Basically, I don't really like the word, everyone calls themselves that. I just enjoy it. I'm always thinking, what can I do? What's going to make some money? What's interesting to me? So I did, do you know G-Wagons? They're like big Mercedes 4x4s, look like a box on wheels.
Like the hippie van kind of thing?
No.
That's like a Volkswagen thing, isn't it?
It's more like... They were like ex-military vehicles, and they're just like a big box on wheels, basically. And now they're stupid money. Like, you'll see them around the posh areas of London.
Okay.
But I did the old military ones, which were much cheaper. So I did those off the driveway for a while. Then I went into property. I did that for a while. Then I went into running dental practices and Botox clinics.
Random.
Really random. And
how did that happen? You just got interested into Botox?
No, what happened was a friend of mine, basically family, like very, very close. They had a couple of dental practices.
Okay.
And they weren't doing particularly well. Mm-hmm. We'd sat down and she said to me, look, we're really struggling. I think things aren't great, and I don't know what to do. We've got problems with staff, and we've got problems with our dentist. And I was like, I can sort that for you. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, I can sort it. She told me the problems they had. And I was like, yeah, I'll fix that.
Like they weren't business people, maybe.
Well, they sort of were, but I think they'd lost love for it, and they had people who'd worked there for a long time who had their own specific ideas about how things would work, and the tail was wagging the dog. Mm-hmm. So I sort of arrogantly just went, yeah, I'll sort that, like half joking. And she said, well, why don't you come over and look at it? So I said, all right. And I went in and I said, well, for a start, I hate your carpet. I hate the way it looks. I hate basically everything about it. It feels like a dental practice to me. It smells like a dental practice. Your staff are rude. And just said it how it was. I said, I wouldn't come here. Mm. And she went, all right then. Do you want to build us a new one? Give me a budget, I'll do it. And so I helped design and build a new one across the road, and that was how I got into it. I knew nothing about dentistry. Started building this
like a TV show kind of thing. A guy comes in and
it literally was,
like kitchen nightmares, but business nightmares.
It literally was, and
quite interesting. You should pitch that movie.
Yeah,
what's your next venture?
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, so I did the design for them and made it not feel like a dental practice. We called it the gallery. So it was like an art gallery when you walked in. I had art all over the walls and completely changed the place. Had a beautiful fountain in the middle and just, it didn't feel like a dental practice.
Nicola Dorier's wife had something similar. So she...
Oh, really?
She actually just started a laundromat. But all the laundromats in Japan look horrible. They're not places you want to, you dread it. It's like noisy and like everything's rusty. Yeah. But she made this one. It's like called The Wash, and it's like somewhere. Okay. It's like it feels like an Instagrammable cafe almost. Like,
right.
It's kind of designed well. It's still got your washing machines, but you wouldn't mind going there. It's a much nicer place to spend an hour while your clothes washed than the other ones, right? So
that's
like a similar
nice
kind of Like she showed me some photos once. Maybe I can. But just
I'd love
kind
to
of similar
see.
concept. Like, why do we have to make dental practices ugly?
Yeah,
it was. It's like design isn't really that expensive.
It's just having some imagination, and also it triggers. So, like, a lot of people are scared of the dentist, and a lot of people have had bad experiences, especially from like childhood. Especially people, when they used to just rip people's teeth out of school and that kind of stuff. You go back 30, 40 years, and dentistry was very different to how it is now. And going in and having that smell. That smell of triggers it, and certain, like the way that, the layout of where you would sit, all these little details would trigger people. And I suffer quite badly from anxiety myself. And so like last night, coming to that meeting, getting myself and actually meeting new people, I feel incredibly uncomfortable. I don't know if you noticed, like I went absolutely like pink in the face, like felt really, I was like, sweating.
I was quite nervous. I was like, but I didn't notice. No,
but so like I then pick up on these triggers with people because I suffer from it myself. And
it's amazing how many like people who like suffer from anxiety, but it's like, but in a way, I don't know, from my point of view, you don't seem to notice. They seem like very confident people, but it's kind of nice to know that everybody, even people who are like look like they're doing well, still suffer from things, right? You know,
I think we all do. We all have our own problems. I mean, mine's like I have just like a weird trigger where if I'm meeting new people, my head will think, what are they thinking?
Sure.
You know, you go to all these dark places where most people are just having a normal conversation.
Yeah.
And then I have this weird thing where like, for no reason, I'll just go like, my face will start burning red. I don't even have to necessarily...
Physiological kind of response.
Yeah, I don't have to actually be uncomfortable. I can have a really nice chat with someone, be really interested, and like, that will happen. And it's really uncomfortable. And then sometimes I just say like, oh, by the way, I'm probably look like a fucking tomato now, but it's nothing you've said. It's just one of these weird things that happens in life, or like my hands are sweating and stuff like that. So I think loads of people suffer from stuff like that.
Yeah. But it's human nature. Like depression's another one, right? Like, you'll have somebody who seems completely fine, but secretly, you know,
I think it's all
they couldn't get out of bed that morning or something. You know?
It's all linked.
Churchill, right? Famously, I think we call it the black dog.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we still got stuff done, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I called it. I think.
But that, I mean, so that's actually that's what made me. Yeah, that's what made me design it in the way I designed it, and it's also what took me out of it. Because
I want to go there now, too. I don't
think
I need any work done.
No, it's we don't own it anymore. It's sold now, but the design will still be there. Yeah, I did that for 7 years. Introduced Botox because that's where the money is. Introduced teeth whitening because that's where the money is, and all this stuff. And
I think it's probably English people don't care about their teeth as much. That's that stereotype.
There is that stereotype.
Other countries, you know, people would.
America, it's always that, isn't it? They're like, oh yeah, English have bad teeth. It definitely changed. It changed from like a dental practice, which was more like NHS, basic, bog standard fill and drill, to doing more of the cosmetic stuff.
Yeah, almost like a beauty kind of barbershop. Yeah, it's a place. Like, in a way, where people go to have beauty done or get the haircut. It's it's a social thing. You like talking to the guy. It's a social outing as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But in all honesty, I had no love for that business.
Sure.
It didn't excite. It did at the beginning. It excited me because I saw all these new and exciting things we could bring in, but I lost love with it, and it got to a point where I was really, really anxious going anywhere, speaking to anyone. I didn't want to leave my house, and when I came home at night, I would paint just to calm myself down. I really enjoyed it. I just found that I'd put on some music, I'd shut myself away from the world, and I'd paint. And it got to the point where in the mornings, I'd barely slept because I'd been painting all night, and I'd be thinking, I just want to paint. I don't want.
You never painted before. It's just
I loved it at school, and I actually wanted to go. I was sort of advised to go on and do some more and go to university and do all this stuff, but circumstances meant I had to work. So I put it aside, and I just never went back to it. And I picked it up again because I was suffering, and I was just like, I need a release. I need to do something, and so I started painting, and then eventually I just went, I've had enough. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to just paint. I left that work, and then whilst doing that, I stumbled into Bitcoin, and now just those two things are what I absolutely like. Every day now I wake up and I love it.
Yeah, I can say I think there's a few others who you probably know, like kind of Bitcoin artist type people around, right? There kind of seems to be some sort of like natural thing there. There's something appealing about both of them, maybe.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think it's quite a fringe thing. Both of them are quite fringe, and they're sort of away from normal society. You don't get up and go to do your 9 to 5 and yes sir, no sir, thank you very much sir. And it's very different.
Yeah, I guess a kind of aspect of freedom and maybe your personal.
Yeah, freedom and doing something that you love.
You don't have to ask permission. You don't need anybody else to do it. You just,
And loads of people don't agree with it, or like don't like what you're doing, but you don't care. You're like, I'll just do what I like doing. And I think that's where that link with Bitcoin is.
I guess artists are kind of rebels themselves, right?
Kind of.
Bitcoin is, it's like, it's like that kind of punk.
Yeah, definitely. It's
aspect,
that rebellion, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
What is it that drew you into Bitcoin first? How did you, obviously you're a developer and this stuff will make sense.
Very random, actually. It wasn't like, I had no particular, when I was clicking onto Bitcoin, I wasn't like a libertarian or anything. I was kind of somewhat fresh out of, maybe like 4 years after uni, I think. Mm-hmm. So I was actually working in Australia, in Sydney, for an app development company. And, I was at the time, I was like very interested. My main thing was physics. I was like really interested into physics. I was like studying physics as like a hobby kind of thing. And I was going to make a YouTube physics channel. And I was actually doing an open university course.
That's cool.
And but my day job was actually making games. And so politically or like anything, I
wasn't aligned in that respect.
I was just like anybody else my age, kind of like a bit left and liberal, and I didn't really think of it too much. I don't really understand the concept of why you'd want to have your own money. I had no idea of that kind of thing. And I was actually just like the company I work for, we basically in Australia at the time, they had like a 60-minute show, which is like, I think they have it in America, but they have one in Australia. It's like very big. And they had the 60-minute show about this kid who made an app and like made like $10 million. You know what I mean? He made an insane amount of money on this simple app. And that, the business I work for made apps. So because of that one TV show, we got like loads of clients, just like all these like people coming in off the street with like, 20, 40 grand who wanted us to make an app for them.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was just like making all these like basically kind of like a shitcoin version of apps. Stupid. Like people would come in and make Angry Bears was one I made, Angry Bees, all these kind of ideas. And then one guy came in and he wanted to make a Bitcoin wallet and app. And it's like early 2013.
Okay.
I had no, what's Bitcoin? What's this? I had no idea because it was my job to make it. And then my coworker, who like kind of sat to the left of me, he just kind of, I saw him he swiveled around on his chair. He was like, oh, Bitcoin. He's like a secret, like he didn't talk about it. He was like a kind of a libertarian kind of gold bug guy, and he always kept it quiet, but he was like, yeah, I've got some of them. So I just started talking to him, and then I had to learn about Bitcoin just to make this app. And then I kind of watched like Andreas Antonopoulos videos. And I think my first thought about Bitcoin was, once like he explained to me, it's like, oh, that makes sense, internet money, that's bound to happen at some point. And I was like, well, there's only 21 million? Well, and then I thought, imagine if there's only $21 million, how much would $1 be worth? Yeah. I better get one, So at that point, it was pretty much like financial and technological. Technologically, as a developer, I was interested in this idea that you could have programmable money. And then financial, I thought, if this thing takes off, get in early kind of thing. It wasn't like that early. It was just before the run up to Mount Gox. So I think it was like $100. And then it ran up to like $800, and that's when I bought my first one at $800. Right. Then it went up to like $1,300, and then the whole Mount Gox thing crashed. But I guess kind of fairly early.
It sounds like it was meant to be. You had that libertarian sat next to you who just
maybe, yeah. But then I just got into it and like kind of fell down the rabbit hole. I started to mine Bitcoin. I made all these Bitcoin games. And then actually because of Bitcoin, I started to read about, what's this thing called Austrian economics?
Yeah.
Never even heard about like Keynesian economics. I just heard about economics, right? And then all these different schools of thought. Then I moved back to Japan. I don't know, I think kind of like a political journey I had, I would say that the idea there's like different ways of thinking about, things that other than what I just learned at university, which is
told. Yeah.
Well, at uni is quite, there's kind of one kind of thought. Ironically, there's like one kind of thought you have to abide to a lot of the time, right? So this idea that, just like fringe kind of things, and the kind of Bitcoin connects a lot of these like punk movements, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of, and then I started to fall down the rabbit hole about, I started to like read a lot of like Locke and Burke. Mm-hmm. There's that kind of like philosophers which are all about like, sovereignty and the idea about the state shouldn't be too big. And like I'm not an uber
self-sovereign
libertarian, but I'm probably like more towards the end of small government. I think I'm kind of, I don't like to give labels, but the whole thing kind of Bitcoin introduced me to this idea.
Just at least less government, less interfering.
as little as possible. Like maybe I like to. I don't know. It's complicated, but but yeah. And that's kind of started to attract me more than the original technological thing and finance. I think that's one of the reasons why I used to be a big blocker.
Yeah.
I went from a big blocker to a small blocker because I appreciated more the sovereignty more than the actual than
the tech. Okay.
Than the actual we need to make this like a great app.
Yeah.
Kind of. That's why when I was saying about anti-technology, like a similar concept. So that's kind of, I suppose, my kind of introduction to it.
You fell into it, and
did
it just grip you hard quickly, or was it like a slow burn?
Yeah, straight away. Like a lot of people say that when they heard of Bitcoin, like they were skeptical and they heard about it and they thought this is stupid internet money and they forgot about it and then they came back to it later. I was like, as soon as I heard about it, I thought, of course we have something like this would come. It just kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So so I was really into it. Obviously, I'm much more skeptical of Bitcoin now. So when I first got into it, I was like not skeptical at all. I was kind of in a way just like, it's great, it's amazing, it can't be killed because it's decentralized. But as I become a developer, you start to see like how the sausage is made.
Yes.
So I think now, in a way, I'm more skeptical of Bitcoin's chances of success. But it's a more of a healthy skepticism.
I think you've got to have a little bit of skepticism. But what is it that worries you now? Like, if you're looking at it and you're thinking like, okay, what concerns me?
I guess the code base, it's kind of crap in a way, how it was made. Like I said, like technologically speaking, well, it's like if you build it from scratch, you wouldn't do it that way. But we can't really change it because we need to kind of respect the original implementation. Obviously, if you could change it, then it wouldn't be decentralized.
Yes.
So in a way, a lot of the things we're doing now is, in a way, kind of like hacking it. But in a way, that's kind of how the internet works. You could always rebuild the whole internet from scratch.
Yeah.
Personally, I guess what concerns me, I suppose there's always a question about like economically can mining be sustained going forward? Like say there's some sort of like, I don't know, some sort of massive coordinated government attack that do whatever they want to try and crash the price of Bitcoin, then the miners, would that hurt them?
But then you have the difficulty adjustment. And
true, yeah, there's mechanisms to, but there are certain scenarios where you can have there's I think it almost happened. I think when Bitcoin was crashing from its like the Mt. Gox highs to like 200, or like there's technical scenarios that you could imagine where the difficulty adjustment it would be like some sort of like spiraling, self-fulfilling thing, the death spiral. So those kind of things. So no, definitely it's corrective. So I don't think it's quite malleable in that respect. But just from an engineering point of view, I think Blue Matt actually talks about this quite a lot. If your listeners are not familiar with Blue Matt, you should definitely try and follow him on Twitter. He's like a Bitcoin core dev, but he does a lot of work on trying to keep mining decentralized. Because mining, like when Bitcoin started, the idea was like one CPU, one vote.
Yeah. And
then like Satoshi didn't anticipate pools, so the protocol wasn't designed to be resilient to pools. Yeah. So like Blue Matt has some like better hash, which is trying to make pools more decentralized. Yeah. But he basically gave this talk in San Francisco where he said that you really want to accept 200 confirmations.
200?
Yeah, he kind of...
I always go with the 6.
Yeah, well, I think he was like being an engineer, so again, it depends. But like he said, so I think he made an observation that a lot of the largest mining pools, the mining pools are kind of somewhat decentralized, but the security on the mining pools is pretty bad. So somebody could make a bot which hijacks the mining pools, and basically 200 blocks was something like, he estimated that was like the amount of time it would take for the developers around the world to wake up and like make a hard fork or make some sort of soft fork to try and address it.
Okay.
But like I think there's a big issue in mining that if all the mining pools got compromised, because I think the protocol they were using was like very poor and it didn't have proper authentication. So Blue Matt, he actually demonstrated he hacked Wiz's mining pool. He had the permission, but he showed how you could easily write a bot that would hack and take over. And then in a way, the mining might be decentralized, but because you've kind of hacked the pools. So that's fixable. Obviously, they have better, like Blue Matt is working on better protocols, but there's these things like, and then it's a question, has Bitcoin really been attacked yet? Like, it's been attacked, but is it?
It's still so small.
Have all the governments got together and tried to attack it? Will they?
But can they? if you look at the way that they operate, how well do they work together?
Mm-hmm. No,
Not at all.
I agree. Yeah,
not at all.
I don't think they can.
So it's kind of like, in theory, yes.
Yep.
But for them to actually work together, probably not. And how much is this on their radar? It must be to some extent, but I don't think they... It's almost like coming from a position of privilege. You don't know you need Bitcoin. It's the same coming from a position of privilege. You don't know quite how much of a threat it is to you.
I think what's more likely to happen is rather than governments attacking it, they might embrace it. It's kind of like an arms race. Like, say that Russia starts to buy up Bitcoin, the states will start to buy up Bitcoin.
It makes sense.
You know what I mean? So that's probably more likely to happen. I'd imagine. That, that would be a good thing. So then, in a way, the incentives are there that they wouldn't want it to fail because,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're already buying. Like, why wouldn't you? You can print money at will anyway.
Yeah.
We're all hedging against the traditional system because once you learn and you actually start to understand how the world really works, you go, oh shit, I better hedge.
Yeah.
So they built the system. They must, in the same way that you're an engineer, so you understand what the risks are with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
They're engineering their own system. They must see that this is a fucked system. Like, there is serious problems. Let's hedge. Mm-hmm. They're just not going to tell anyone.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It gets a bit too conspiratorial, but obviously the politicians or the bankers, like, they know when, like, not to keep their money in the traditional system, maybe, or like they don't have cash. I think that's one kind of on this learning curve, the idea. I think that's one of the difference between, say, like, poor and middle class or wealthy people. The idea that poor people don't realize you shouldn't hold cash because they don't really understand. No one's explained to them about, like, inflation and interest rates. Right. I think I was joking with my brother. It would be great if you never see Ken Loach make a movie about interest rates or something, which is, in a way, it's probably arguably one of the biggest things that makes a divide, that like
definitely
rich people know not to keep their money in cash. Like, as you said, they keep it in assets.
Yeah. And then you learn about compounding and you're like,
well, I never did. Like, I kind of came from, like, a northern town, which is, like, more working class, and it's very kind of, like, Puritan, and it's the idea that, like, you don't waste money and just save all your pennies in a jar. Yeah. And that's what all my family and friends have always done, like, and don't,
put your money on
avoid debt or anything. You just keep your money on the mattress. Yeah. And it makes sense when interest rates were, like,
8%.
Yeah, and inflation is low. Yeah. But now when, like, all you're doing is just your money, it's getting less and less, right? Yeah. And I had no idea about that concept until I got into Bitcoin. The idea that you didn't really know what inflation or interest rates were. It's just something that you hear about in other countries. But the idea that, I think I can't remember who said it, but the idea that if you wanted to give your grandchildren $1,000, how would you do it? You wouldn't put $1,000 in a box.
No. Because it's going to be worth nothing.
I think I found that coming back from Japan. I actually had, when I came back to England from Japan, I had some, like, pound coins. And apparently I can't use them anymore. Because England changed the pound coin. I got like £4. I'm like,
I've got a load you can't use.
But the same thing, like, how do you give your grandchildren $1,000? Maybe gold, sure.
Yeah.
But...
Yeah, maybe gold. I think Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I've got a little bit set away, which is just like, if I have kids.
How do you give your grandchildren in a different country $1,000? Maybe that's it. The goal will be a bit harder.
Yeah. Like you say, it is, once you go down that rabbit hole and you start learning all these things, all your ideas or what you've been told start to crumble away. You get to a point where you go, well, where's the truth? What's real? Where, like...
Yeah. I think it's not even that, not necessarily what you've been told. I think, like, what's intuitive to us is kind of like, apes. It's not necessarily what's true, and a lot of economics is counterintuitive, and a lot of like science is counterintuitive. So I think that idea, you just grow up with the idea that you are poor because somebody else is rich or something, right? Or that kind of thing, and then kind of just learning about Bitcoin and just learning about, kind of maybe question those ideas, and
coming from a physics, I don't know if you call it physics background, but you have an interest in physics. What's your thoughts on this kind of Bitcoin basically being like time and energy? Do you have a sort of thought around it? I know it's a little bit of a deep question, but my time and energy, if I have to convert it into something, I want it to be Bitcoin. I kind of see time and energy almost being Bitcoin. Like, it's almost like it's
I guess it's really a question of entropy, isn't it, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it, I guess I did computer science, right? And you have this concept of information theory. So in a way, you can convert, like, mass to energy to time to information. And information in a way is just, like was it? Entropy is things getting random, right?
Yeah.
And you put energy to make things get organized, which you could argue is information.
Yeah.
And a Bitcoin in a way is finding a hash, which in a way is like organizing random energy and to find this one kind of organized hash. So I kind of think the things are definitely convertible. And I think you kind of not necessarily a person's time or energy, but you hear a more direct use case about how power plants, right?
Yeah.
They can mine Bitcoin when they're not selling the power. In a way, they're converting that energy to value.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily wasted. That value can be released later as energy, right? So
especially when these power plants are in areas where they don't have a proper grid infrastructure, what do you do with it? Like it's going to go to waste. So you might as well convert it to some store of value. Which is Bitcoin. Like,
exactly.
I wrote an article recently on this because I had the last person I had on was a friend of mine who's in energy business.
Oh, cool.
And he goes to all the councils and basically is trying to get them to go to solar.
Yeah.
And his original point, he was like, look, I love, he's one of the only people I've spoken to. He's like, I love the idea of Bitcoin. Like, I love that. He loves the scarcity. He's like, I get it. He's a switched on guy and he was just like, that makes sense. But he was like, I've got to be honest. I'm concerned about
global warming.
Bitcoin killing the planet. So I wrote an article literally for him about this stuff. And that was one of my points was, firstly, if you pay for energy, same as like Bitcoin, if you pay to use it, it's valid. And if you've paid for energy, use it on what you want. And also the fact that these miners can go anywhere in the world and use their energy that would otherwise go to waste helps them then expand quicker, especially when it's solar and things like that. So in my mind, if everyone switched across, it would be so much more efficient than the system.
I think it's much more complicated than the idea that any one thing will kill or fix the planet. It's like this idea. I think there's the concept that if we just stop doing X, we'll stop global warming. Our system is way more complicated than that. And I think it only gets addressed by, like innovation and technology moving forward rather than going backwards, this kind of...
Yeah, it's like, let's all just go and just live on a farm and...
Yeah, this crazy kind of like extreme opinion that, if we just undid the Industrial Revolution, we'd all be like living like Pocahontas or, like, what's that one? There were the planets. It's like a Pocahontas ripoff. Avatar.
Yeah. They're making a new one, actually.
And they are, yeah. It's probably a good film, but yeah. Just that I think this kind of sidetrack, this kind of goes through I think there's two schools of thought. It's Hobbes and Rousseau. And this idea that most people are Rousseauian, especially nowadays. The idea that nature is this kind of perfect, kind of harmonious thing, like Pocahontas or Avatar, or like Fern Gully, if you remember that movie. And like the man and civilization is corrupting it, and we just need to kind of get rid of ourselves or reverse it and go back, and we'll all be fine.
Nature's brutal.
Well, that's the Hobbesian view. It's like man and nature were horrible, and it's brutal, and man is horrible. The only thing that makes anything okay is civilization and technology, right? And that's kind of the battle between the two. So every time I kind of hear this idea, kind of like Bitcoin's going to kill the planet, it comes from a Rousseauian kind of line of thinking. Well, I think a lot of kind of Bitcoiners generally have more of a Hobbesian line of thinking. Yeah. And probably the answer is probably a bit of both, obviously. I don't want to like say it's either or, but people don't realize that they think something because they listened to somebody on YouTube or they went to a university, and you can trace like all these back to this guy called Rousseau, like a philosopher, and it's like, because like capitalism was amazing like years ago, nobody had any issue with it, and it's just like a kind of a recent thing that
I think it's quite a young thing. And when I say young, I don't mean in age, I mean as in, I almost see time as like the more battle you've done and the more shit you've gone through and the more like life is thrown at you, the more you start to realise the world's brutal. Yeah. You've got to take responsibility for yourself. Yeah. Nature's brutal. Yeah. Everything comes down to you. You have like this ideology. Like I always used to think it when I was younger. I was like, oh, why can't everyone just have money and we all just share and we all just look after each other? And then I lived, and then I was like, fuck, life's hard. I've just got to look after myself. And if I can look after myself enough to be in a position where I can look after others, then great. But you've got to look after yourself first. But until you've sort of been smacked in the face enough times, then you're like, you go to that.
Yeah, that's the middle. It is like life is comfortable nowadays, so people don't realize like this, especially in like growing up in like middle class England, right? Yeah. But yeah, I have like a similar story. I kind of I think I lived was in Australia, and then like I think it's a very small thing, but I didn't have a job.
This is before working with
before I got into Bitcoin, yeah. So I went to Australia. I didn't have a job. I had like an idea I was going to stay at this guy's house, but literally before I boarded the plane, he kind of bailed on me. So I was like, getting on the plane, going to Australia, and I've got nowhere to live.
Oh no!
And I just kind of landed. I had some like money in my bank, but like literally, okay, I've got to find a job and find a place to live. And I'm in a foreign country. I can't just like go to the government and get welfare, right, or something.
No.
My parents weren't particularly rich or anything. They'd probably always be there, but it's difficult when you're in a foreign country. Idea that, but it was kind of nice, the idea that, I was so happy to get any work, just to work in like, I was applying for like restaurants and stuff, and, just to get anything there. I was like so happy I could tin of beans. And then life was probably, compared to somebody in like, say, Venezuela, is like luxury, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Exactly.
So kind of imagine, I even have moments now when it's like a small thing, but sometimes I just get amazed when I turn my tap on. Running water, it's crazy,
When you're mindful of these things, we do take it for granted, but yeah, sometimes you have to just stop and be.
I think it's Marcus Aurelius, I think, is one of his Stoic philosopher king Roman. They had this thing where like what he would do is it's like a practice where you just imagine a horrible life. Yeah, like you imagine, like, I don't know, your family, you've got cancer or something and you're starving. You try and feel that, and then it's like waking up from a bad dream. It's kind of a good practice, not to do it all the time, but now and then, if you ever,
Oh, it definitely is.
It's a good practice to do. Well, sometimes life just reminds you anyway. Yeah, because you don't get a choice.
I catch myself sometimes, like the most ridiculous stuff, because we do, especially in this country, we come from a position of privilege, and I do catch myself, like I'll go to the shop and then like want to go and, I don't know, buy some salmon or something like that, and I'm like, I fucking haven't got any salmon, fuck's sake. And I, like, in my head for a second, I'm like really annoyed, and I just think, shut up, you dickhead. Like, just, and the same thing, think about.
That's the same thing. I went to the supermarket with my mother a few weeks ago, and I was in the supermarket, and I just had like this moment of like, look at all these too many choices of everything. Like, there's like 5 different brands of flour or something, right? It's just crazy. And I was like, just had like a moment of appreciation. And on the way out, my dad called my mother on the phone, and my mother said, "Oh, ask Chris, there was nothing in the supermarket." I'm like, what? We had a very different moment, right? Obviously, like, she's never lived in, like, I don't know, say, like, Soviet Romania or something like, or whatever it was, something where, like, there's those stories of people who fled Romania and went to America. I think there's one story where, this guy, he went to America from Romania, and he called his mother to come over. And this is when I think it was Romania or Albania. At the time, it was like it's like Soviet, then it became a dictatorship. It wasn't a nice place. They went over, and the son picked the mother up from the airport, and he was a limo driver. That's what his job was. He was a driver. And then he drove her to the supermarket, and the mother just like broke down crying in the supermarket. And like, they lied to us. The people in Romania. And then she was just shocked that her son, who was a driver, could shop here. I think they had a similar story in England. There was some like Soviet guy who came over. I think he went to Harrods or something like that with his son. And he thought his son must be a member of the communist or the party in England, because in his country only the party members get to shop here. It's like, no, anybody can shop here. Like, this is crazy how we don't realize it.
We can only imagine. Yeah. We can only imagine. Like,
it might happen again, so maybe.
That's the other thing. A lot of Bitcoiners do have this dystopian idea of how the world is going to go, and I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. I'm prepared in my head for it, but I try and think positively in terms of people will embrace sound money, governments will get smaller, people will start to. Like, a big thing for me with Bitcoin, one of the things that really clicked for me, being I hate the word entrepreneur, but someone who likes to start businesses and explore different ideas. One of the big things for me, and really pissed me off for a long time, was red tape and regulation.
Oh yeah. Have that now.
Yeah. And it's so bad. And I got to a stage, I remember sitting and having a conversation 5 years ago with someone before I knew about Bitcoin. And I'd gone worried about cash and worried about us losing that. That's getting more and more difficult to use, to be accepted or be able to take. Every time I go to the bank, they'll ask me a question. And every time I have an idea and I look into it, I've got to have solicitors involved, patenting involved. And whatever we do, we're regulated into the ground, especially with dental practices. I spent half my time filling out paperwork, not dealing with patients. And it was nonsense, like absolute
It's
shit.
not even effective, right?
It's just shit.
Yeah.
So I got to a stage where I got really down about it, and I was just like, the world for someone who's entrepreneurial is dead.
Yeah.
Unless you're a multimillionaire already. And my view is, rather than the dystopian,
you can afford somebody else, but somebody breaking in, trying to break in.
Yeah, someone who has little but smart and has good ideas, everything's stacked against them.
Yeah.
And my view with Bitcoin is like it just levels that playing field.
Sure.
Or can, not yet.
Yeah, it's hard. As a crypto startup, obviously we see barriers,
Yeah.
Especially like some of the regulations coming in, right? So it's annoying, right? And
while the government's still there, while they still stand, it's hard. If they get smaller and smaller and smaller.
The world's becoming more global as well, right? So, you can be based in a different state, for example, a lot more easier than before. Yeah. And that's why I'm more of a small government proponent, right? Where it's much easier. If you don't like the regulation in one place, you go to another smaller government, right?
Yeah.
I think Switzerland apparently does this well.
Yeah, I've heard that.
There are like lots of different states in Switzerland, but each one is quite autonomous and has its own. So if you don't like one place, you can move.
Have you guys looked into something like that, or are you sort of managing okay to do the things you need to do, or is it?
We're okay, but we obviously So recently, what happened? One of our, contemporary companies, like a fellow Lightning startup, had recently closed down because of regulation. Bottle pay.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
and that's because like a new law that's coming in
force them to KYC people or something. Is that
it's a bit grey. That's the thing. I think I don't want to speak for them, but I think from my understanding is that the lawyers weren't sure if what they were doing was okay, and they live in the UK and they have families in the UK, so they could have all like up sticks and moved somewhere else, but I think they chose just. I don't think they're going away forever.
They've just said for now.
Just for now, they just don't want to do anything in this time that would get them like arrested or something, right? They just want to play it safe.
It's crazy, isn't it?
And that's luckily we're okay at ZEBEDEE. I think also being non-custodial helps a lot. I think at the time bottle pay were completely custodial, so that's why they were a bit more anxious. But yeah, just it's it's a pain, right? Any small business wanting to start.
The whole idea with this regulation is supposedly protects people and protect the businesses. But if you believe in like free markets, if something's a shit idea, it will die. And if you do things that are going to cause problems to the people who are using your service, they'll leave and they'll go to a competitor. So like we're saying, nature is warfare. From the second you wake up in nature, like it's just warfare. It's the same with business. And if you're going to provide a bad service or do something that's bad to your customers, natural law is self-regulating.
I think something like, again, like if, for example, if something like the EU becomes if its regulation increases, you'll probably see like there's no massive tech companies in the EU. There's a reason for that. Right? Have you ever heard Thomas Sowell? Have you ever heard his work?
I've heard the name. I haven't.
Yeah, he's a famous kind of like conservative thinker, but he kind of makes this point that he has this good thing on regulation. It's quite interesting. I'm not saying it's true, but it at least makes you think. This idea that I think in America, you didn't have to have a seat for a baby on an airplane.
Right.
You actually hold the baby. That was okay before. What happened one time is there was a crash, like there was turbulence. Right. And the guy was holding the baby, and the baby died, right? Because he didn't hold it. So they put regulation that the babies must have their own seat and must be strapped in. Sounds fine, right? That makes safe. The baby went down the plane. But the consequences were that more babies died, and the reason is now. Say you've got a family and you want to go on holiday, your mum and dad and a baby, but now you've got to buy an extra seat. So what people started doing in America, they said, okay, well we won't take the plane anymore. We'll just drive instead.
Yeah.
And that kind of unintended consequence actually led to more babies dying because driving is much more dangerous than the one baby who had died on that plane. So there's all these things as regulation. Anyway, it creates more paperwork and more cost, but doesn't necessarily, I'm not saying all regulation is bad, but just like willy-nilly just slapping regulation on without the consequences. And once you add regulation, you can't repeal it as easy.
No.
So it's...
And I was saying, like, keeps people down because the big businesses couldn't afford the regulation.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to dentistry, we only had 2 practices. The businesses where they had 50, 60, 100, they'd have someone who just dealt with the regulations.
Sure.
So So they had someone who just sit and box tick and make sure you had 4 different mops that were all color coded. And some of the stuff, it was called CQC, Care Quality Commission.
Okay. Not close quarters combat.
yeah, similar. And it was nonsense. So like someone like me, I went from being able to talk to all the customers and make sure that I gave them a personal service, make sure that I could then speak to the dentist and make sure that nothing was missed. Yeah. I could then make sure that I took them across to the desk and make sure that everything was a really nice and good experience and nothing was missed, to I was sat in my office 12 hours a day filling out paperwork about fucking mops.
Yeah.
And what the regulators didn't see was, okay, firstly, the service quality has gone down, but also the cost to the business, because I was converting more sales and upselling, whitening, or this and that because I was having time to speak to them. It was affecting us financially, and we couldn't afford, because we're only small, to have someone just deal with the regulation.
Yeah.
Which meant that we suddenly can't compete. Yeah. So then the big businesses come and buy the small businesses, and then all you end up with is
monopolies and stuff.
Yeah. But that's what happens across every sector, and they cry out for more regulation.
That's
so
you have, I think David Starkey is like a famous historian.
Yeah.
He kind of I went to a talk to him. He made the point that it's the problem that nowadays being a politician or an MP is a job. Before it wasn't a job. You were actually you had another job.
Yeah.
An MP, you do something for free. But now it's your job. You've got, because that's your job, you're expected to make laws or something, right? And like, if you have a big civil servant or a big government, they're not going to do nothing. They're going to come up with ideas and regulation.
Yeah.
That's what they do, right? So it keeps growing. I think there's that law that some people want passing, that for every regulation you add, you must repeal 2 or something, right? Or repeal 1, or there's some sort of balancing thing.
Yeah.
You can get that in a constitution or something. I don't know.
Yeah, because a lot of them are just mental.
Yeah. And I'm sure, I would like regulation on nuclear power plants, for example. I'm kind of okay with that, right? But just like small businesses who like cut hair or something, it's, you don't need it. Like, you know, there's plenty of competition that, you can see making, and that's kind of what you have on the internet that they're trying to squash, but you have that in a way.
That's the idea of small government, because I don't necessarily want no government, or
if you want to, you can just go to Somalia, right?
Yeah.
I think the thing is, you can't have no government because there'll always be a gang.
Yeah.
That would make itself the de facto government. That's how I kind of see it, right?
Well, they are. That's what they are.
Yeah. Well, in a way, but it's kind of like a small government is the least worst gang you can have.
Yeah.
It's somewhat, we can change them, right? That's the idea.
Yeah.
And they have a constitution to limit their power. And
if you just said obvious stuff that almost everyone agrees with, don't kill, don't steal, the basic, what I guess is like libertarians would agree with.
What government should do, right? Yeah, just kind of
but don't
enforce property rights for people or whatever,
Don't, like saying like hairdressers, don't go and shut down a business that's been running for 30 years cutting hair because they don't have a certificate for some shit where every single customer who's gone there for the last 30 years is really happy.
Yeah, there'll be one customer who gets like tetanus because they use a rusty scissors. I'm sure that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But even if you had regulation, you'd probably get that somewhere.
You still get it. And then those small businesses close down, you get a supercuts instead, and like as another personal. So self-regulation is the thing. And then just pay for, we want some form of like police, but don't go and arrest someone and put them in prison for. Again,
that's what I liked. I think Japan is one of the countries that did policing very well. It has its issues, but they have this idea like, Bobby's on the beat.
Mm-hmm.
So in Japan, they don't really have a massive police station. They have all these small police boxes,
right?
Which is it's like a box which fits about 2 policemen in,
right?
And you got a desk, and they're just scattered throughout the town.
Okay,
so that's a much better thing than say CCTV. In England, we have all these CCTV cameras watching you, but they actually just have physical policemen in the location. So there's always a presence, but it's just like it's like a policeman sitting on a desk with a truncheon. It's not like it doesn't feel like a police state, as it were.
London to me feels like that now.
Yeah,
completely. Like it's one of them, isn't it? The most surveilled.
Yeah, we have CCTV. I worry about England, but then I hopefully I can. Maybe I'm just because I'm British. I think that there are things now and then. I think English people generally have the concept of self-sovereignty. I think in them, which makes us a bit stubborn as now, but hopefully that will always prevail. But I do worry about.
I don't like going to London. Like there's CCTV everywhere, and there's people roaming around with assault rifles and stuff, and like
a lot of terrorism, right?
But it's just like it doesn't make me feel more safe at all. Like it I'm thinking, if a terrorist wants to do something, they're going to do something. Like, they'll find a way. They're going to find a way. And having all the CCTV and all this stuff, I think it just impacts the lives of everyone else. I feel uncomfortable. As soon as I go in there, I get that same thing, like my palms are sweating. I just feel like horrible and uncomfortable and like watched, and feel like I'm in 1984 when I'm going to London. And as soon as I step out,
it was INGSOC, wasn't it? English socialism.
Yeah.
I think England's always had that kind of battle. Like, it's always had like a kind of a socialist streak, fighting with the capitalists, and that's kind of how a political system works in a way. We go like Labour to Conservative, but even the Conservative Party of recent years is kind of not really like sovereign anymore.
Definitely not.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to. I hope maybe this current Conservative Party, like, obviously they're not perfect by any means, but I know there's a few people there who I know actually are quite, on the same page when it comes to libertarianism. So as compared to the previous one, for example, but who knows, right? At the end of the day, the politicians, right? So
yeah, exactly. So moving forward with your business and your plans and stuff, you were saying yesterday about trying to get these other developers onto the platform. That's really what the idea is. Is there, other than you're obviously doing, what was the next meetup you're doing?
Well, Advancing Bitcoin is the main event. And there's a lot of meetups around that. Yeah. Advancing Bitcoin is the main thing. Doing a workshop there.
Outside of that, like, have you got a sort of plan of how to reach out to people who maybe don't know about Bitcoin, but they're game developers? How is it spreading, and how are you pulling these people in? Is there sort of...
Well, I guess initially, obviously, we just want to grab the low-hanging fruit, which are like Bitcoin-interested game developers. And there are a few of them around, so we're going to kind of grab them first. But yeah, of course, we want to try and attract kind of like all game developers. So we're actually going to start, like, our current list of conferences and workshops are going to be around Bitcoin-focused events. But then eventually we're going to start attending some of the non-Bitcoin gaming events and kind of like test the waters, Like I said, I think if you speak to most game developers at the moment, they're not interested in Bitcoin. And the reason is like they need to kind of see it in action. So that's why we're developing these games to kind of show them, look, did you know you could do this in your game, You can have this concept of like sponsors who put ads, and then from those ads you can pay your players Bitcoin, and they'll play your game more because they're getting Bitcoin. Or you can have this concept of esports where the audience is participating. Another thing is that I think we kind of, at the moment, we want to try and work with like one or two smaller studios and really make a good game, with the idea being if we can like help them with the Bitcoin side to make a real good Bitcoin experience, and that game studio is a proper game studio so they can make a real good game, if we just get one game that kind of like becomes popular and starts to make a lot of money with Bitcoin, I think then you'll see the other game developers jump in. They just need to see it happen first. You've
got to have one to...
So I think that's personally, we're speaking to some game... We've got a lot of interest, actually, just from these last few months. So at the moment, we're just trying to... Because we've only just started in October, so we're still building the SDKs and APIs, getting them ready. But that's the plan, is to try and kind of work with some game studios and also with our own games, just to make some games and get them out there and show, look, this is working. People are playing these games. My indie games before with Bitcoin had a very high retention rate because of just, people would play the game because it would pay them sats or pay them Bitcoin. So we just need to get that out there and get the data.
As soon as your game launches, I'll be back into gaming.
I
want to go and earn some sats.
Sure, yeah.
For sure. And I know, like, everyone I know who's interested in Bitcoin as well would be exactly the same.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a draw.
I think stacking sats, I think the whole idea, not even in gaming, but I think like Fold app, for example, if you know that. Yeah. The idea that you just go grocery shopping and you get sats back instead of cash back. I think that's a good way to onboard people, especially in like countries like England where people don't necessarily want to use Bitcoin to pay for things. Yeah. But people want to get free Bitcoin. Why not? It's better than a reward point.
We can use Fold here, though, can we?
I think you have to sign up for Fold.
I thought it's certainly is it Try Lolly or Lolly?
I don't. Yeah,
they're just American.
No, I remember I used Fold when it first came out. So Fold actually came out back in 2014. Yeah, I remember it came out. You could buy Starbucks with it. So I was using it to buy Starbucks. But then the whole kind of scaling and on-chain, they kind of closed down. Now they've come back with Lightning.
I'll have to look
but at the moment, I think you have to, it's like a waiting list. So it's in trial. You have to kind of put your name down on the waiting list. But I'm sure they're going to release at some point.
Yeah, because I just literally this morning signed up for that TravelX card, which does the same sats.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So TravelX, you get like 1.5% back in sats every time you buy it.
Yeah, it makes sense. No brainer.
I've literally just signed up for it today because I do a lot of driving. And for me, like, I'm just constantly filling up. So I'm just like, if I'm doing that and I'm spending sats, I'm getting the sats back. So exciting. Like, it might only be a small amount, but rewards points.
And there's no risk as well, right? You know?
Yeah. And I think that's what draws people in, the games and the sats back. And
like I said, we can do a similar thing with gaming, you know. Yeah, it's kind of, it's a no-brainer. So hopefully we'll be bringing it out soon.
Awesome. Listen, I'm conscious on time because I'll waffle on all day and take up your entire day. But for the listeners and for potentially any game developers who might be listening, how do they get in contact with you? How do we learn more about these games, and how do we get in touch?
Easiest way would just be to follow us on Twitter at ZEBEDEE, which the spelling is ZEBEDEEIO. So ZEBEDEE.io. I'm sure just read the show notes. The link will be in there. I think follow us on Twitter, and then from Twitter you can find our website. And
I'll grab all your details.
Easiest way.
I'll put them all in.
Yeah, but feel free to drop us a message or email us. Happy to talk to anybody. People who want to make games.
Awesome. Listen, thank you so much for coming down.
Oh, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it a lot.
I was really excited when you were one of the first people who's come on the show, and I really wanted to get you on. And as soon as you wrote back, I was like, oh my God, he's actually wrote back. He's coming on the show. So I was really excited.
I can introduce you to other people if you want some. I think Advancing Bitcoin, there's going to be loads of people in town. So maybe you can grab a few people.
Awesome. Well, I'll get myself down there. And, but no, I really appreciate you coming down.
No problem. Thanks for the biscuits.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. All right. Fantastic. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just leave it rolling.
It's fun. I enjoyed that. Actually. It's quite
good. No,
nice kind of casual kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's the idea. I want it to be casual and not too interviewing. To be honest, a lot of it's just for me. Like, I really love just meeting people like you and just learning more about this space. And
I think the podcasts that I listen to that I enjoy the most are the ones where they'll kind of sidetrack on like random stuff, you know. And it's kind of, I think it's a nice format
because there's so many different links with it. Almost just talking technical or just talking about the economics or just
everything comes back to money, really.
Yeah, it does. Everything links back to money. For me, starting this podcast was, I can't talk to people in normal life like that anymore.
Have you tried? No, I just don't mention it. Like if people ask me what I do, I say I'm a programmer. But I used to say Bitcoin, and then it comes with all these connotations, and then you have to explain what Bitcoin is. Then before you know it, you're like, just like people are like,
you're that big guy, and like no one cares.
Yeah,
and that's what
ask you about, should I buy Ripple or something?
Yeah, you sit down for 2 hours. You're like, right, this is why it's going to change the world. This is what's wrong with our current system. Blah 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 blah. And they're like, awesome. Yeah. So XRP.
Then people will say stuff like, if the price dips, they go, "Hey, not doing so well, are we, Chris?" Or these snide comments. I have a few friends who are like, if somebody brings it up, then I'm off like a rabbit, right? But I don't really. When I first started, I used to just like, have you heard about Bitcoin?
Yeah, I was the same.
Using a credit card.
Yeah, I was the same. I would just talk to because I genuinely believe this can help the world. Like, I wouldn't be doing it otherwise. I don't earn any money out of doing this. I give up other work where I'd be earning money so that I can do this.
Exactly.
And
I'd have a lot more money if I stayed in banking or something. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the reason I'm doing it. So I used to talk to everyone about it because I believed in it, but no one wants to listen. And so then I went all quiet about it, and then I thought, well, I really do want to talk to people about this. And speaking to people who know much more than I do in certain areas is just...
How long have you been into it, if you don't mind me asking?
About 2.5 years, something like that. Like, I've only ever really seen a bear market.
I first learned about was it after it went to 20k kind of?
It was like... So I'd heard about it maybe... I watched that show on Russ Ulbricht and what had happened with him.
Is that the one made by Bill and Ted guy? Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called now. It was about 3-4 years ago. I watched it. And I watched that and I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting, but like didn't really think anything about it. And I was so busy with other work and just didn't dig into it. And then that bull market happened, and on Facebook and everything, everyone's talking about it. And so I have a friend who's been on here, Crypto Tony, and he was talking about it, and I reached out to him. Trust the guy, like really, really smart and really down to earth bloke. So don't worry, I'll do that. And so I reached out to him and I just said, look, mate, let's catch up for dinner. I want to ask you a couple of questions. So I said, what is this Bitcoin thing? Like, what's going on? And he explained it to me, and along with all the other shitcoins and everything else. And yeah, it just clicked for me because I do come from more of that libertarian leaning, like...
You're probably like a kind of like a business kind of guy, right?
Yeah, but I always had that kind of like, fuck authority. Like, I'll just do what I want.
Yeah, the idea that like you can't own your own money. You need to ask permission to send somebody. Like, if you said that about information, it's like, what? It's like North Korea, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's perfectly fine to have it on money, which is like, in a way, it's
my energy
value.
Time.
Yeah,
it's I was talking about physics. Like, it's my energy, it's my time. I've used my energy and my time, which is finite, to get something. No one else controls it, and so that very quickly sent me down the rabbit hole. I was just like, once it clicked, I mean, I was just going around talking to everyone, and then it just, you have to you get to a point where you have to just shut up. You have to just shut up and
I think it's not helpful in a way. You kind of just have to like, rather than talking about it, just like, hopefully I use it and demo it and show use cases in a way.
And then I get kind of like lonely because I was like, no, I was, reading through Twitter and like reading all the articles and listening to all the podcasts and I had no one to talk to about it. And I was just like, right, well, what can I do? How do I get to speak to people and I can learn from? And also, because I have my anxieties and like I didn't really want to leave my house or speak to anyone, I was like, well, what's going to force me out of that?
The good thing about like the Bitcoin world, just like even from just the social aspect, like Bitcoin, like there's no one in Bitcoin who's not approachable. And you find out that you have friends all over the world.
Yeah.
So every time I go to a country, you just kind of find a local Bitcoin. I'll know somebody from Twitter in that country. I'll be like, I'm going to Spain. They go, one of my Twitter followers, hey, let's meet up. And you've got like someone who you can have a good conversation with in any country. But even just like, like say that I also like to play guitar, but I'm never going to speak to Eric Clapton or something, right? With Bitcoin, I just remember like in a bar in Tokyo and like, Peter Weller walks, he just walks in like, shit, I was like so starstruck. But you just talk to him.
How do you pronounce his name?
Oh, I always say it's Peter Weller.
Peter Weller.
But people say Wooly. I thought it was Weller.
Peter Weller.
I did ask him at one point.
Okay.
But I forgot what he said.
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy.
Yeah, no, I remember just speaking to him was one of the reasons because he actually came. It was weird because he came to Nicolas Dorier brought him to the Bitcoin meetup, and Roger wasn't there at the time. But like nobody, he just walked in, and I thought, I'm never going to be able to talk to him.
Yeah,
but just went to the bar by himself, and no one spoke to him. Those went over, and then like a few weeks later, Vitalik came. Like fucking was mad, he couldn't get in the door. It's weird, but he's a workhorse. He's a really smart guy. Actually, I found like Luke Dash Jr. was probably the interesting guy.
I've heard a few interviews with him.
He's like a kind of autistic savant kind of.
Yeah.
He like Peter Waller. He wouldn't be an interesting character in a movie, for example.
Right.
He's a good engineer and he's smart, and he's clever, but but Luke Dash Jr. is like this crazy kind of like super fundamentalist Catholic anti-vaxxer. But he's also like a super, super smart genius when it comes to programming. But then he would put like Catholic scripture in his Bitcoin transactions. I remember like I ended up in Tokyo with him, just like watching at an anime party, watching an anime with him about Japanese schoolgirls going camping. It's just weird. Like this is the guy who's responsible. He made the first ever mining pool, right? It was quite interesting.
He seems like he's hugely respected.
He's very nice and polite.
Yeah,
he's like because I think he's like very religious, so he comes with like a religious decency kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
but on Twitter, some of his views can be quite extreme. But that's a good thing about like Bitcoin. It's like you welcome people. Like you're not offended talking to anybody with extreme views because you yourself are kind of extreme, right?
Isn't one of his views is something like 90% of people have to run a node, otherwise it's
Well, no, he thinks the block size should be smaller.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Well, to be honest, technically, if the block size was smaller, it would solve a lot of problems.
Right.
One of the issues now is, like, for example, say you have a block size of like 100 kilobytes. You could kind of just have this, because currently you kind of need the internet to use Bitcoin. And Blockstream are trying to get around that by transmitting the block through blocks. But what you could do, if the block size is small enough, you could use like low frequency radio. It's kind of like almost like streaming TV signals. You know, so you can kind of stream them, but the block size stops that.
But I assume there's counter arguments. How, as a percentage of,
I think most developers think the block size should be smaller. The issue is, I think they probably don't mind too much. They think
definitely not bigger.
The issue is the issue is not with it being small. The issue is like how you make it smaller. The idea that like, you know, who's going to make that decision, and you'd have to hard fork, or you know,
right. Okay.
And I think the consensus is, well, let's just try to manage it and just try and improve second layer. And there is going to be a block size increase at some point, probably, maybe. It's hard to know, but like most developers are not opposed, and actually, people have made proposals. Like even Bitcoin core developers have made proposals, like how should we do this? Mm-hmm. But the issue isn't so much the block size, it's about like who decides that. And if you do it on a hard fork, then which one's the real Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, it'd be nice if we could avoid it.
Well, I think, no, we're going to have a hard fork at some point. Yeah. So like hard forks, it depends. Hard forks are needed, for example, to fix an emergency bug. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely a hard fork needed because there's a bug in the code where...
it's an inflation bug or something. They found recently.
Oh, that was like a bug, but that didn't require a hard fork. Right, okay. Yeah. That's another reason why Bitcoin development should be more conservative. It's going too fast already. But no, there's a bug that, like, I'm not sure if you know much about programming, but if you have like a data type.
I'm learning.
Well, you know what an integer type is, right?
Yeah.
You get different size integers.
Yeah.
Actually, if you use like JavaScript, that's all kind of hidden from you. But if you use something like C, you have to choose, like, you're going to have a 16-byte integer or like a 6, you know, there's different lengths. Basically how much memory you get. And if you want to store very, very big numbers and, the integer is going to run out of space, it's the one that's chosen, you know, so we're going to have to upgrade that to a different type, which would require a hard fork. You know, so that's a non-contentious hard fork, right? Okay. You know, you just kind of,
we don't fix it, Bitcoin, isn't it? It's all C.
But there's also hard forks. Like some people have started toying with the idea because some people are concerned that, you know, once the mining rewards drop to Bitcoin price isn't what we hope it is, miners might not be paid. So some people have like dared to toy with the idea of adding inflation. You know, I don't think that'll ever get through.
From my personal opinion and coming from a non-technical background, if they introduce inflation, I'm out.
Yeah, they couldn't. I agree they couldn't. But
to any degree, no matter how small,
I guess the argument is if Bitcoin dies if you don't do it.
I'm still out.
Right.
Like for me, because that's one of, for me, the most important things is like once you introduce it this much.
True. I agree. I don't think you can't introduce it now, but if you could start Bitcoin from scratch, I think the issue was not that we're against inflation. We're against the idea of inflation that can just be arbitrarily decided, right? Mm-hmm. So say that Bitcoin just had this idea that, you know, it would only ever be a small amount of inflation.
If it was from the start.
From the start. People wouldn't, because that's like bankers or whatever couldn't, or the Fed couldn't abuse that, you know. Yeah. That was it. But I agree. I think what will probably happen is I think there'll be some like better shit coins that will come out, if that makes any sense. Yeah. If Bitcoin's not enough, we'd have some sort of like side chain technology or something that would try and compensate for that.
Yeah, that's
like Liquid's a bit like that, right? In a way, maybe, you know.
Yeah, I could deal with that.
Yeah, especially state change, which I mentioned. If that ever comes out, that would be pretty cool as well. A more trustless version. So I think that's probably what. And I think as privacy tech increases, we'll get like side chains which become more and more trustless. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why Liquid.
Yeah, Liquid's pretty cool for that, isn't it? A lot of people are.
Well, it gets away with being centralized because it has good privacy.
Yeah.
So the idea, because you use these like confidential assets and stuff. Obviously, it's more centralized because it's like federated.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because they can't see what the transaction, so there's less information for them to censor you in a way.
I think there will just be more and more of these options that just, like you say, side chains and things that definitely make sense.
Yeah. Is there anybody else you'd like to get on the podcast, or are there any people in mind?
Sure, I have another one who I didn't think I was going to get on. Pierre Richard
on
Monday.
Oh, nice.
Which I'm really excited about. And outside of that, I've put some feelers out, but it's still fairly new for the podcast. So
everyone's making town right again, but like a bunch of big stuff.
Yeah, I don't have like a specific list of like these the top people. It's just anyone who's involved in this. I want to hear their opinions. I want to hear their thoughts, as many as I can, because it interests me. And if it interests the listeners, then great. But really, it's how this would be. Just
I wanted to have a chat and why not record it?
Yeah, exactly. Can I make you a copy for the road or something? No. So if you've got anyone you know who would maybe be interested in coming on, if you let me know, that would really appreciate it. Probably have like Gloria, for example. I've got to go.
I don't know how busy schedule actually, but